Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. We're really delighted we could have you here. I apologize, our chat feature isn't working, but we have instead people have been using the Q&A to let us know where you're coming from. So thanks so much. I'm just going to welcome other folks who have just joined us. We have Wen, we had Rich Ting coming from the ACLU, Sam Silver from Schneider Harrison and a PILP board member. Thanks for joining us. Bonnie Kift from PA Sun Cadby and a Prison Society official visitor, Susan Strebig from St. Paul, Minnesota. So thanks so much. Destiny Brown from Harrisburg and a co-convener of the Pennsylvania Prison Society, Elaine Selon, also Pennsylvania Prison Society official visitor, Bet Jean, Kim and Scott Brown from South Carolina, Nick Bellows, Richard Stokes, Betty Jean Nobles Thompson, Hannah Zellman. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you can see the Q&A, all of you. Unfortunately, our chat is not working. We're going to go ahead and get started. I see that it is a little bit past 6 o'clock. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Su-Ming Ye. I am the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, and I'm really just delighted that you are all here to join us this evening. As you may know, the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project is a legal aid organization. We're part of the Pennsylvania Legal Aid Network, and our goal and mission is to advance the constitutional civil rights of people who are incarcerated and detained in Pennsylvania. So essentially, we're seeking humane conditions, making sure people have access to medical care, that they're safe from violence, that they are able to observe their religion, that they have accommodations for their disabilities, and overall making sure that people are treated humanely while they were incarcerated. So we use a variety of tools, but mostly legal, legal help, legal advocacy, and the most in-depth we do is we will represent people in court on their civil rights claims. So thank you so much for joining us. We have a fantastic program this evening. Thanks so much for joining us. So our focus today, the title of our event is called Confronting the Healthcare Crisis Behind Bars. And so our focus this evening is to really talk about the challenges in medical care in jails and prisons. Our focus, of course, is in Pennsylvania, but what our clients experience really are very similar to what goes on across the country. And there might be some particular nuances of Pennsylvania, but we're very grateful that you can join us to engage in this discussion. So what we'd love for you to do is, if you have a question and answer, if you have a question, please go ahead and put that in the Q&A. And also, if you want to comment, you can go ahead and put that in the Q&A. I think people should be able to also see you should be able to see each other's questions and hopefully all the answers as well, or the questions that were already responded to. So, our focus today is medical care. We have a focus a little bit on some issues. So chronic health conditions, transgender health care, mental health care, treatment for medication for opioid use disorder, among other things. So we have three main speakers. And one of the speakers is Salvatore Cimenti, who is pre-recorded because he is incarcerated currently. He's a client of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, or has been a client of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project. So you'll hear from him first. And Sal Cimenti is an individual who's been incarcerated in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections for near 40 years. He's been a long time person that PILP has been in touch with and has worked with. I personally have known him for about 10, but actually people from PILP are in touch with him and his family for long before that. And so we are really grateful that he agreed to speak with us so that you could hear from him directly. Next, we're going to have Alexandra Morgan-Kurtz. She's our managing attorney. She's located in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. She's an amazing litigator, an incredible advocate, and incredible support for all our clients. We could not do the work that we do without her amazing skills and her talent and her compassion. She has litigated a myriad of individual and class action cases, obtain meaningful settlements for people who are sexually abused, obtain religious accommodations for people in state prison, successfully challenged the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections' new legal mail policy. And today she'll be talking about medical care issues. Now, one thing is, PILP actually has an announcement this evening that we're going to be making about a development, amazing announcement about a development in one of our cases, something about our clients. I'm going to let Alex make that announcement. She is the critical person behind what has happened. So stay tuned for that. And then we have Sarah Bleiberg-Bellows. She's an independence fellow. She's a newer attorney with us, but working on an incredibly important project, expanding access to treatment for medication for opioid use disorder. She previously clerked for a New Jersey state justice and a federal judge, and also has had worked on health policy issues and worked at a communications firm. So we're really delighted she can join us today. So with that introduction, welcome again. So again, just want to remind you, feel free to use the Q&A if you have any questions or comments. So I am now going to turn it over to the video where Sal Chimenti was interviewed.
What is your name?
Dr. Chimenti.
And have you experienced any difficulties with medical care while you've been incarcerated?
Yes, much.
And can you tell us what conditions or medical conditions you've suffered from while you were incarcerated?
Well, I have cirrhosis. Now I have cancer.
And what was the cirrhosis stemming from?
Hepatitis C.
And how long had you had hepatitis C?
Oh, I had it for years until they cured it.
And if I remember, you were initially diagnosed with hepatitis C in 1991. Does that sound right?
Right.
And do you remember the process you went through to try to get medical care?
They wouldn't give me medical care at that time. I had to wait till they came with a plan to treat me with interferon. The interferon didn't work. It only made me sick. I took interferon from December of 98 to March of 99. And it didn't work. This made me sick. I had to wait 6 months for them to give me a dual therapy with ribavirin. Interferon with ribavirin. But that didn't work either. Then they sent me to another jail. I was there for a year for triple therapy.
Yeah, so if I remember, in 2011, the triple therapy was approved by the FDA, but you had to wait almost a year to get that medication. Is that right?
Yeah.
Can you describe that? What happened there?
I just didn't respond. I responded partially, but not all the way. I relapsed. I did respond at first, then I relapsed 2 months later.
Going back to the triple therapy, do you know what impact that delay had on your health?
Well, my cirrhosis was getting worse because I already had cirrhosis. It was getting worse, and I wasn't feeling very well. I was weak. Then the ribavirin, then the Harvoni came out, and I asked them for it, and I had to wait 2 years to get that, approximately 2 years. Carboni cleared it. I think that was 2012.
Right. I think, if I remember, you were started to request it in 2012 or 2013.
2012, but I didn't get it until 2013, close to 2014. 2 years I had to wait for the Carboni.
The Harvoni cured your hepatitis C?
Yeah, but it cured the cirrhosis. The cirrhosis led to cancer. Now I have cancer because I wasn't treated properly.
Do you feel that the delay had an impact on your health?
Most definitely. The delay made my cirrhosis so much worse. That the cirrhosis damaged my liver so bad that I got cancer from it now. I currently have cancer. I'm not being treated in time. Even though I was cured of hepatitis C, it doesn't mean it had anything to do with the cirrhosis. The cirrhosis continues. Even though you're cured from hepatitis C, the cirrhosis doesn't stop. It keeps going, moving forward. I moved forward to the point of where I developed cancer.
And how is your health now?
Not good. It's terrible. They rushed me. The cirrhosis is not working properly. It's not making my liver work properly. I'm suffering from high ammonia level because it's not digesting or processing the ammonia in my blood, and it's causing me. I had a blackout a couple of times.
So the progression of your cirrhosis also affected your brain function?
Yes. From not processing the ammonia in my blood, I had a blood ammonia. I got treated September 1st for the cancer with chemoembolization. And instead of making it better, it made it worse. In 1 month, my cancer grew from 1.9 to 3.0.
And overall, how would you describe the medical care that you've received?
Horrible. The nurses don't really do anything. They got nurses' aides. You know, when I have to release my bowels, they let me stay I go in my bedpan. And the other night, I had to lay there for 45 minutes before they cleaned me up. Now I'm suffering open sore in my buttocks. So now they're giving me some kind of creams, because I'm not moving as much as I should. But I developed open sores in my buttocks, which is not good because I can get sepsis. My whole condition is deteriorating.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to hear about all your struggles. So, Mr. Chimenti, I'm just going to take you back a little bit to the hepatitis C issue. So, you were the named plaintiff in a class action lawsuit, and you had a role in about 5,000 people in the Department of Corrections getting this very necessary medical treatment.
Harvoni, yes.
Harvoni, yes, and other direct-acting antivirals. Why did you bring this lawsuit?
Because I had to wait so long to get treated. They weren't treating me. For some reason, I had to wait 2 years to get treated. It was out 2 years before I received it.
How do you feel about the results of the lawsuit?
I feel okay, because they're still not doing anything. I can't get a liver transplant in prison, but the only way you can get a transplant is you got to be out in the real world, in public. You got to be out of prison, because they don't perform liver transplant in prison. The hospitals won't even do them. So actually, I'm dying in prison, and I should be out in the street trying to get treatment, trying to get transfer or some kind of treatment, but they're not doing anything.
You know, I've known you for many years. Do you have anything to say about the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project?
Thank God for them. They helped me get treated. They were part of the lawsuit and represented me. They were a blessing. You were a blessing. You still are a blessing.
Thank you so much for listening to that. As was mentioned in the film with the audio, Salvatore Chimenti was our lead named plaintiff in Chimenti versus Pennsylvania Department of Corrections. It was a class action lawsuit that the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project brought with our legal partners, Carrie Rudofsky, Messing, Feinberg, and Lynn, and Decker, which did result in thousands of people receiving hepatitis C medication. We filed it in 2015. And then in about 2018, we resulted in a settlement. Unfortunately, as Mr. Chimenti mentioned, the damage to his liver had already progressed. But I'm very, very grateful that he agreed to speak with us. He knew that this was going to be played, and he felt it was very important for people to hear directly from those who are impacted by what is going on and by the work of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project. So as you can see in the chat, if you want to learn more about that case or about him, you can go to that link and then you can learn more about that. So now we're going to turn to our next speaker, and that's Alexandra Morgan-Kurtz.
Thank you, Suming. All right, everyone. Thank you so much again for joining us tonight. I'm going to talk about a couple of different issues, and I'm going to share my screen. So hopefully that will work in a second. PowerPoint showing? There we go. All right, now it's up. All right, sorry, PowerPoint is not one of my skills. As Sumi mentioned at the beginning, I am the managing attorney for the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project located in our Pittsburgh office. And a lot of what Mr. Chimenti described is unfortunately the experience of many people incarcerated throughout Pennsylvania's prisons and jails and throughout the country. And as one of my roles at PILP is to supervise the intake in the Lewisburg and Pittsburgh offices. And without a doubt, the thing that we hear from incarcerated people about the most is the need for medical care and the issues that they are having. And so first thing I wanted to focus on tonight was on chronic conditions. You already heard a little bit about hepatitis C and some of the other conditions that I'm just talking about when I mention chronic conditions are things like diabetes, asthma, HIV/AIDS, all these conditions that require frequent monitoring, care, and treatment of an individualized and constant nature. And a recent study from the Department of Justice found that 50% of incarcerated people have a current chronic medical condition. So this is not just people who have a history of some kind of condition in the past, but people who are actively suffering from a condition and need treatment for that. And in fact, individuals who are in jails are twice as likely to have diabetes, asthma, or high blood pressure than the general population, and people in federal and state custody are 1.5 times more likely to have those conditions. And when it comes to diabetes specifically, which is an area that I and PILP have done a lot of work in recently, 10% of incarcerated people have diabetes. So this is a very large population of individuals who require constant attention to their medical care in addition to the day-to-day. And unfortunately, despite this very present need, our prisons and jails are woefully understaffed and don't have the policies and practices in place to deal with these conditions. So, for example, in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, the prisons will have several hundred to over 1,000 individuals incarcerated there, but their medical staff will consist of one, hopefully full-time, sometimes part-time doctor, and then less than 5 to 6 individual nurses and nurse practitioners on the medical staff. And those are the only individuals available to these several hundred people for all of their medical needs. And so what we've seen that result in is, while the Department of Corrections will have a policy about chronic care and say that individuals with diabetes should see a doctor every 6 months and have their care reviewed, what happens is that 6-month visit is 3 to 5 minutes with a nurse practitioner who goes over a quick form and then sends them out. Doesn't look at their past history, doesn't really take the time to ask them any questions about what they're actually experiencing outside of just a small handful of questions. The other thing that we see is that in a lot of chronic care conditions like diabetes affect a large number of bodily systems, and the different people who work at the Department of Corrections don't talk to each other, don't review records, don't make the connections. So, for example, one case that we had was on behalf of our client, Selena Williams. When she was incarcerated at SCI Muncie, she had a number of issues going on. She had diabetes with blood sugars that were not being controlled, and she experienced severe pain in her feet. And so she went to the foot clinic, and they gave her pain medicine for her feet without consideration of the fact that she was diabetic. And in fact, the pain medicine that they prescribed to her was contraindicated for people with diabetes because it elevated blood sugars. And so she ended up with astronomically high blood sugars, and then that led to additional stomach conditions, which were, again, all treated in separate silos and didn't treat the person as a whole, didn't consider the other conditions. We were able to represent her after her release and get her a settlement for some of the harm that she experienced. Unfortunately, she, like many other people who have been through our prisons and jails, and like Mr. Commenti, has to continue to live with the consequences of those years of inadequate care. And so since her release, Ms. Williams has experienced a number of health crises and has found it very difficult to access life in the same ways that she did before her incarceration, because of the way her health has deteriorated due to the lack of care that she received while she was in the Department of Corrections. We have also represented a number of individuals with other diabetes issues. And one thing that constantly comes up when you're talking about diabetes in the carceral setting, and even to some extent in the general public, is the fact that one of the ways that you can control diabetes outside of regular medical care is also diet and exercise. However, in the Department of Corrections and in our jails, our clients don't have that ability to control their diet and exercise. And so the Department of Corrections will not provide individuals with care, not check their blood sugars, not prescribe them with insulin. Their blood sugars will become uncontrolled. They'll experience collateral consequences of that. And then when they bring up the problems that they're having, the staff at the prison will just say, well, you need to eat better and exercise more. But the prisons and jails don't even have a diabetic diet, and our clients aren't able to pick what they eat. They're not allowed to pick how often they go out. They're not allowed to change how they exercise because those options aren't available to them, and the prisons and jails don't do anything to provide better care in that context. And this, in addition to the cases that we have litigated, we have also in the past year sent a number of advocacy letters to particularly SCI Muncie with respect to the diabetic care that's being received by the people incarcerated there. And what we've seen there has been that continuation of the troubling nature of not paying attention to what's going on with individuals who have shockingly high blood sugar, who are passing out, who are having to be hospitalized, and the staff basically just shrugs their shoulders. We sent advocacy letters on behalf of a number of women, and so far in each of those cases, after we sent those letters, some changes were made for those particular people, and we're continuing to look into ways to create more of a systemic change when it comes particularly to diabetes care, but also with respect to chronic conditions more generally. Okay. All right. So that was really quick, but I've got a lot of things to talk about. So moving on to the next big chunk of medical care that I wanted to talk about today, and that is healthcare for people with gender dysphoria. So 1 in 6 transgender Americans and 1 in 2 transgender Black people have spent time in jail or prison. That is an absurdly high number. And at the end of the day, our prisons and jails know next to nothing about what kind of medical care to provide, how to provide medical care, or even accept that medical care is necessary. But the most important thing to remember here is that gender dysphoria is a medical condition just like any other. Individuals have a constitutional right to that care, and there are standards in place for what care should be provided. An important note is that not everyone who identifies as transgender or non-binary or gender non-conforming has gender dysphoria. Those are 2 distinct situations, but a number of people do have gender dysphoria. And the treatment for gender dysphoria isn't a one and done thing. We hear a lot in media and Hollywood about the most aggressive treatments. And for some people, those are absolutely crucial and absolutely necessary. But for a number of people, there are a number of other steps that are absolutely crucial to providing people with the safety and security and health that they need. So one thing that should be easy for prisons and jails to do, and yet we see them not doing time and time again, is allowing individuals to socially transition. And so that's allowing them to live in pods with people with the same gender identity, giving them access to clothing, giving them access to hygiene items, and other things that match their gender identity. And when I talk about hygiene items, it's one of those things that always makes me actually laugh in the medical care context, just because it's something that I always have such fun joking with my clients about, because it is, it's something we on the outside take for granted, that we can just walk into a store and decide what shampoo we want, what body wash we want, and it's no big deal. When it comes to the prisons, especially in the state prison system, even the hygiene items that are provided at commissary are incredibly gendered. And so there's super floral and perfumey smelling soaps at the women's prisons, and there's more masculine sandalwood and those types of smells at the male prisons. And so I have a client who's non-binary and is housed in a women's prison, and a transgender woman client who is in a male prison. And at least once every 3 to 4 months, both of them will say to me, I just want to not smell like X. I want to have access to this other thing. And it seems like such a small thing, but even that change is a part of the treatment for gender dysphoria, and gives them so much more confidence, and helps with their mental state. Just even when my one client was allowed access to nail polish, it had the hugest impact on her stability and her happiness while she was incarcerated. And it's something easy for prisons to do. There's also hormone therapy, which is its own massive mess. But one thing that we see a lot in county jails in particular is this refusal to recognize that prescriptions for hormone therapy should be provided, not understanding how hormone therapy should be provided, and then also just not understanding what type of care at all should happen. We recently sent an advocacy letter to Allegheny County Jail on behalf of an individual who had recently had a double mastectomy and had an infection. And when he complained about those issues, the nurses actually said, yeah, we don't know how to treat LGBT people. So sorry, you're out of luck. But moving on to the bigger issue that we actually litigate about, and we have 2 cases about, access to gender affirming surgery. There are a number of different surgeries. However, the thing that people most commonly think of is top and bottom surgery. And in the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections, despite the numerous transgender people who are incarcerated in the Department of Corrections, prior to our litigation, not a single person in the Department of Corrections had ever been approved for any form of gender affirming care when it comes to surgery. We filed a case on behalf of our non-binary client Doe in Cambridge Springs, and on behalf of our transgender woman client at SCI Mahanoy. And for those individuals. And several months ago, our non-binary client was finally granted permission from an administrative committee to have surgery. And we had hoped that that showed a change in policy moving forward. However, shortly thereafter, our transgender woman client was denied access to surgery. So it is still an ongoing problem even to get that approval. And now, just talking really fast because I wanted to get to the announcement that Simi was talking about. In kind of kismet of the universe, we didn't know exactly when it was going to happen, but yesterday, we received our client, Sam Doe, became the first person in the custody of the Pennsylvania Department of Corrections to receive gender affirming surgery. And so I got this email from them this morning, and this was where they informed us that the surgery had happened. I'll just read it aloud because I know it's not the easiest to read. So it says, I had surgery today, still can't believe it's true. Thank you all at PILP for making this happen. I feel incredible and grateful and also a bit nauseated. And so this was the first email that we got confirming that they had surgery. And this is a client that we have represented since 2017. We've gone through the process with them multiple times trying to get the surgery approved. And even when it was approved, we continued to doubt it would actually happen. So getting this news this morning was pretty phenomenal and kind of upended my plans for what we were talking about today. So one other thing, my time's coming to an end, but one other thing I wanted to share is that after I received this email, I reached back out to our client and asked them for permission just to share this email. And they had another thank you email to share that we thought we would share with all of you so that you can see a little bit of the impact that PILP's work does. So, oh, crap. Sorry, that was me getting excited. And forgetting how to use PowerPoint. I was kind of shaking a little there. All right, so this is the email from our client today, and I'll read the some of it. I won't get to see it till Tuesday since that's my follow-up with the doctor and he'll take off the bandages. I meant it when I said that this wouldn't have gotten done without all of you. For years, PILP has been the only ones on my side. You gave me hope and a reason to keep fighting when everyone was against me. You made me feel like I was worth your time and energy when most of the staff were systematically degrading me to make me feel less than human. Even though I know I'm going to have to face abundant backlash on this, no one can take this from me. When I am able to find a mirror, I know that it will finally be me who will be looking back. Thank you all for tirelessly championing the rights of those of us who are existing on the margins. Thank you for showing me I matter. So that's one little bit of some of the work that we're doing in this field. And like I said, this was the most amazing news to get today. And there's still a long haul to go when it comes to transgender healthcare in our prisons and jails. And I'm going to do a quick I know I'm past time, but I've gotten a little bit of permission to talk a little bit about mental health care in jails. Mental health care is absolutely something that could have an entire day of panels about the problems within our system and the ableism inherent within our criminal legal system that has resulted to the over-criminalization of people with psychological disorders. When we're talking about the problem of mental health care in our prisons and jails, it's important to think about the numbers because the numbers are just so huge. According to NAMI, which is the National Alliance for Mental Illness, every year, 2 million people with serious psychological conditions are put in jails. 44% of people in jail have a diagnosed mental health disorder. And study after study after study has shown that jails and prisons house more people with serious mental health conditions than psychiatric hospitals or facilities. So in our country, we are continuing to over-incarcerate individuals with serious mental health conditions, and we're putting them in an environment that is not only resourced and equipped to provide them with care, but is in fact extremely detrimental to their health and well-being. So for example, at the Allegheny County Jail, we currently have a class action lawsuit about their lack of care that they're providing to people with mental illness. And depending on what numbers you look at, the population at that jail is anywhere from 40 to 80% individuals with serious mental health conditions. And despite that, the jail refuses to provide any kind of counseling whatsoever. And there are not, when there is brief by the door 5-minute counseling sessions, it's 5 minutes, not in privacy. That's absolutely not a way to provide any kind of psychiatric care. There's lack of adequate provision of medication, as well as the continued punishment of people with mental illness for their for actions that are related to their conditions. And that punishment then just creates an even bigger cycle, which leads to people being put in restraints, people being put in whether it be restraint chairs or physical restraints around their ankles and arms, being pepper sprayed, and ultimately in many of our prisons and jails, solitary confinement. And solitary confinement itself can cause and does exacerbate mental illness after even 15 days. And in our prisons and jails, we have thousands of individuals who are facing those conditions. We have a myriad of lawsuits addressing this issue, and we have done advocacy on this front. So to learn more about the work that we have done with respect to mental health care or any of the other medical care issues I've talked about, please check out our website. And I will now stop talking and turn it over to Sarah.
Thanks so much, Alex, for that very helpful overview, and I'm delighted that she could share that amazing news with all of you. So we are now going to turn it over to Sarah Bleiberg-Bellows, who will talk about treatment for medication for treatment for people with opioid use disorder.
Great, thanks, Su-Ming. And I'll just go ahead and share my screen as well. Give me one moment. So as Su-Ming mentioned, I'm going to talk about medication for opioid use disorder. Some of you may have heard the term medication-assisted treatment. It's really the same thing that we're talking about. We're talking about 3 FDA-approved medications: methadone, buprenorphine, and naltrexone. A lot of people have heard of methadone because it's been around the longest, but buprenorphine is also pretty common now. It has a bunch of different forms and comes with different brand names, so you may be familiar with Suboxone or Sublocade. And then there's naltrexone, which a common brand name is Vivitrol, so some people know it by that name. There are some really important distinctions between methadone and buprenorphine and then naltrexone, and I'll sort of get into that a little bit later. But the important thing to know is that these medications are now the standard of care for opioid use disorder. And opioid use disorder is really a chronic disease, like all the other chronic diseases that Alex was talking about, that needs medication in order to be treated. But there's still a lot of stigma around people who are taking these medications, despite the fact that the science has really advanced to the point now where we know that this is the treatment that people need. And that's actually the reason why we now call it medication for opioid use disorder, because we want to highlight the fact that the medication itself is the standard of care, but it's also often supported by other behavioral health therapies, like individual or group therapy. And when we used to use the term medication-assisted treatment, that sort of took the emphasis off of the medication, but really we know now that the medication itself is the most important part of the treatment. And these treatments are particularly important in the jail and prison context, and that's for a couple of reasons. First, just because there is an incredibly high number of people who are incarcerated who have substance use disorders, but opioid use disorder in particular, it's often not tracked, so it can be really hard to identify how high that number actually is. But one study found that 1 in 4 people with OUD had some contact with the criminal legal system in the preceding year. The other reason why this is so important in this context is that when someone is released from incarceration, they have an incredibly increased risk of death from overdose. And that's partly because if someone's not using opioids, their tolerance will decrease. And if they are released from incarceration and then they return to using opioids, they may not know how to moderate their use in the way that they did previously and could have an overdose and die. We also know that people have a really hard time accessing care and treatment for all kinds of medical care issues when they're released. And so that contributes to this issue as well. Another aspect of this is like everything when we're talking about incarceration, it is a racial justice issue. A lot of people think of opioid use as being associated with white people, but actually it's growing the most among people of color. This is something, there was a recent article in the Philadelphia Inquirer about this, which found that overdose deaths among Black people in Philadelphia has gone up significantly in recent years. It's actually gone down slightly among white people in Philadelphia. So that just goes to show you that this is not an issue that just affects white people, and actually primarily it's becoming more of an issue among people of color. So because PILP had been hearing so much about this issue from our client base, we decided to look into it more broadly, figure out what jails and prisons are doing on this issue. And earlier over the summer, we released a study on this issue. We decided to focus on jails, partly because that's almost always where someone is entering incarceration for the first time, and also because there's a lot of variation across the state. Jails in Pennsylvania are run at the county level, so each county has control over what happens at its jail, as opposed to prisons, which are run by the state. So there's a little bit more consistency across the prisons in terms of what's going on. So you can see here, we have this map which shows all 67 of Pennsylvania's counties. There are 5 counties which don't have a jail within their borders. Those are the ones that are in the yellow color. And then the counties that are in the red colors are counties which are either offering no MOUD or offering it in very limited circumstances. And then the blue counties are offering it to more people. So starting with the darkest red color, those county jails don't offer MOUD to anyone. The next slightly less dark red color offers MOUD only to pregnant women or pregnant people. And that's because if someone is pregnant and detoxes from opioids, that's very dangerous for the fetus. So basically always at jails that have this policy, they will only provide MOUD while the person is actually pregnant, and then they will have to detox afterwards. It's most common that they'll offer pregnant people methadone because it's been around the longest and there's the most data about its use during pregnancy. And because methadone is very highly regulated, it's the most highly regulated of these 3 drugs, they're often having to contract with an outside facility in order to provide that medication. The next slightly lighter color red are jails which will offer naltrexone only. And so I'll get into a little bit now the difference between naltrexone and then the other medications, methadone and buprenorphine, because it really explains why jails prefer to offer naltrexone. And that's because methadone and buprenorphine are agonist medications, which means that they attach to the same receptors in the brain as all other opioids. That both means that they are more effective and science supports their use over naltrexone. It also means that there is a lot of more stigma associated with them, and there's a mistaken belief that you're just replacing one drug with another if you're using one of those medications. But it's really not true, and they're the medications that are used outside of the incarceration context. Basically, no one on the outside gets naltrexone anymore unless there's some particular reason why they might not be able to take one of the other medications. Naltrexone is an antagonist, and so it blocks the receptors in the brain that opioids attach to, and so it prevents someone from dying from an overdose because opioids can't attach to those receptors, but there's a variety of reasons why it's not favored, but it also doesn't suffer from the same stigma of acting in the brain in a similar way as methadone or buprenorphine. The next category we call likely no continuation. Those are counties which are offering these drugs to a very small number of people, but based on the documents that we had available to us, we couldn't identify why such a small number of people were getting it. Then moving into the blue categories, which are offering this on a little bit more of to more people. We have first continuation, which is when a jail will offer this medication to someone who was on it before they were incarcerated. And then induction, which is really what we're shooting for and what we think all jailers should be doing, is when they will start someone on these medications, even if they were not on it prior to their incarceration. Another thing that we found when we were looking into all these policies is that even jails which have a really strong program, even jails which are doing continuation or induction, often have all kinds of other issues with actually providing these medications, and which prevent people from actually benefiting from them. So one example of that is there's often a significant delay when someone first arrives in a jail. The jail, even if they say they'll provide continuation, wants to confirm their prescription with their former provider and isn't able to do that quickly for whatever reason. And it can sometimes be weeks where someone is not getting their medication, and during that time, they'll go through withdrawal, which can be a very painful and serious condition. Another example is the dosing that people will get at some jails which do offer induction. They will only provide someone with a low dose of this medication, and it's a dose that's really not high enough to control their symptoms, and so isn't actually doing what it's supposed to do and won't actually work for them because their dose is not high enough. Those are just a couple of the issues that we found. There are a lot of others. Another example is sometimes people will be punished if they could be something related to their medication. It could be something wholly unrelated, that if the jail just decides they've done something wrong, they'll take them off their medication, which, in any other context with any other chronic condition would be considered, completely inappropriate. But for some reason, these medications are treated differently. Our report does also touch briefly on what happens in the state prison system. Currently, the state prisons will offer continuation, but only for people who arrived at the state prison system after they started doing that. So there are a lot of people in the state prison system who would meet the current criteria to receive this medication, but aren't because they got to the prison system too early when that program didn't exist. If you're interested in this issue, there is a lot more to learn about it. There's a lot more information in our report, and it's available online on our website at pilp.org/mood. And I could talk all night about this issue, but I think I'll leave it there and let you read more about it if you're interested, and turn this back over to Sume.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for that very helpful introduction to MOUD. I should note that PILP is litigating a case on this issue called Strickland versus Delaware County regarding a client who, unfortunately, he had been on a methadone treatment program and then was forced to detox and withdraw when he was arrested at Delaware County, at George W. Hill Correctional Facility. So thank you so much for to all our speakers. What I'm going to do now is ask Mike Carroll, who is the board chair of the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, to say a few words.
So I'm here. Okay, thank you. So I am the board president. My name is Mike Carroll. Last year at our annual event, I quoted Dostoevsky, the author of Crime and Punishment, who said that the degree of civilization in a society can be judged by entering its prisons. We do not need great novelists and great thinkers to tell us that there are serious, shameful problems with our prisons. We know that even if we would rather not know that. There are never really good times for our clients, and these are harsh times. There are programs for persons to advocate for falsely accused and wrongly jailed persons, and well, there should be. This is basic justice and essential if a society claims or even aspires to be humane and fair. But it is also necessary to treat everyone humanely. Our program, the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, serves everyone who is incarcerated, no exceptions, no one excluded, including people who have made mistakes. Often they are punished too harshly and too severely, depending upon the mood and the whims of society at the moment. Recall the times when a few marijuana seeds could get someone sent to prison for years, if not decades. Look at the public attitude now, the public whims. Recall the gross sentencing disparities that resulted from the differences between crack cocaine and powder cocaine, and the racial disparities and unfairness that caused and led to. Something else we might not rather know, the severity and the duration of punishment can too often depend upon where you live, your income, your class, your social status, your color, and your ethnicity. Our wonderful dedicated staff led by Sue Mignet fights pervasive institutionalized injustice every day, fights for basic humanity, the humanity of those incarcerated, but also for the humanity of all of us, because the prison system is supposed to be run for all of us, to protect us. And so we are obligated to know what's going on in that system and to do something about that. One of the basic human rights that PILP, the Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project, fights for is healthcare, as you heard so many great examples of tonight. Salvatore, Mr. Chimente, may have received a death sentence by the department dragging its feet when there was a known cure for hepatitis C, and there was a great delay in giving it to him when it was known. Another example that has always stuck with me is the infamous one good eye policy. When the Department of Corrections, and not too long ago, had a policy that if you had an eye problem with torn retina, cataract, whatever, but you had one good eye that functioned to some extent, they would not give you surgery, they would not give you treatment to fix the damage, the ailing eye. After many months and even more years of hard work and litigation, PILP had that barbaric policy thrown out. But this speaks volumes about the attitude of the system towards inmates and the healthcare they deserve and don't deserve and don't get. So we ask for your help and support in any way you can give it. Help us with your dollars when and if you can. By the way, all dollars are not created equal. Some of our funds are tied and restricted to certain specific projects. We are grateful for them and we spend the money wisely, but dollars you give us might be freer to help clients who are the least popular, the most vulnerable, and the most in need of our help. So many thanks for coming here tonight and for being with us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mike. And so now what we're going to do, I'm going to ask the other panelists to turn on your camera, and we have a few questions in the Q&A. And so I'm just going to ask them and then see who wants to take it. I think I'm going to take Sarah Winch's question. Could you give us tips on how to encourage people we visit to advocate for more or different medical treatment? When should they file appeals or contact you for help via an advocacy letter? So Alex, why don't you go ahead and take that? Oh, you're on mute.
Always has to be someone who forgets to unmute. So yeah, absolutely. So when they should contact us is as soon as they have a concern. We frequently provide advice to incarcerated people, even before they've filed a grievance, even before before they filed a lawsuit. Whenever they write to us, we'll review those letters. Sometimes we'll request medical records and do our best to provide them with information about their rights, as well as steps that they can take while they are incarcerated. I think one thing that we frequently will tell people to do, this is going to sound very lawyer at this moment, but just like paper, write it down. They should write down every time they go to see the doctor, what the doctor or nurse said. They should file request slips to staff requesting care. They should grieve every time they're denied care. The more paper that they file, the more attention that it gets from the institution, which can result in retaliation sometimes. So it's always, whatever they feel the safest doing. But the more paper that they file, the more ammunition that it can give us when we come in and review the records and send advocacy letters on or take cases on behalf of individuals.
Thanks so much, Alex. And I'm just going to say for Sarah as well, if you have an issue relating to getting medication for opioid use disorder, please do send that to us. Send those folks to us because Sarah is focused on that as well. So Betty Jean Nobles Thompson has a question regarding people with intellectual and academic challenges, and sometimes people have dual problems, mental health needs, along with substance abuse. What programs are available for those folks?
So unfortunately, like a lot of things in the system, it varies very much jail to jail and prison to prison as to what programs are going to be available at the institution. I will say that all of those individuals are absolutely entitled to accommodations and programming under the Americans with Disabilities Act, which I didn't have time to talk about today, so putting that in there. But again, it is a matter of, unfortunately, doing a lot of self-advocacy or family advocating on their behalf to find out what programs are there, or reaching out to any of our 3 offices for more information about things that we may know that are available that they might not.
Okay. And then another question relating to people who, Black inmates, is related to the quality of education, quality of healthcare. So just a question about sort of that along with racism in the prison system. So I don't know if Alex or Sarah has a comment or concern about that or answer about that.
Yeah, I think it's hard to bring, sorry, Sarah, it's hard to bring racial discrimination challenges, but it is something that we do our best to flag. In our cases, we'll point out when we can see obvious systemic race-based issues and raise them with the facilities as much as we can. But it is unfortunately a very hard standard for us to take any cases or litigate on.
Yeah. And then here's another question. When someone files a medical lawsuit and if they're incarcerated, they often need to provide a certificate of merit from a doctor. So just to clarify, you can bring a lawsuit under the US Constitution. That's a constitutional claim that does not require a certificate of merit, but it is a much tougher legal case. Or you can bring both, a medical malpractice case where you do need a certificate of merit, a medical malpractice case. The standards are a little easier to win or prevail on that case, but you do need this certificate of merit either from a doctor or I as an attorney can sign that I've consulted a doctor. So the question is basically how can incarcerated people get a doctor to review their injuries and illnesses to see if the medical care met a basic standard of care. And I think that is the biggest challenge. That is why thousands of people who are filing the cases by themselves pro se have to file constitutional claims, which is actually a harder legal case to bring because they do not have access to someone who can provide that certificate of merit. So I don't actually really have an answer to that aside from there is now a consortium of doctors who are willing to help out, but it is, they're pretty full up from last I heard, sort of pro bono doctors, if you will. Generally, the way we do it is we just ask around, maybe consider doctors who haven't been an expert before, but are well known in their field, are knowledgeable, and are willing to help. So that brings us to the conclusion of our program. Thank you all so much for joining us. We really appreciate everyone's time and attention this evening. Thank you so much to the speakers. I want to thank the PILP board for their support, as well as in particular, Ben Bowens, who's behind the scenes. You don't see him, but he's the person behind Pennsylvania Institutional Law Project for all that he did to put it together. We're really delighted you could join us. And just, since I have you here, we do really appreciate all the support, both in terms of advocacy for our clients, but also any financial support you're able to give. Litigating cases is not only time and energy, but it actually is pretty expensive. Just to file a case in federal court is $402, and to do an appeal is $505. Getting transcripts and depositions can be thousands of dollars. So we try to do everything efficiently and as well as we can, but sometimes you have to hire a medical expert to prove that claim. So we are really grateful for all of your help, your attention. Thanks so much for joining us this evening. And we hope to see you at our next event. Thanks so much.